for it to say those words. Yeah, so welcome to week 3 of the course. And so this week is on AI in education, friend or foe. So the first week we looked at kind of using generative AI, and last week was more on demystifying AI. Whereas the next 2 weeks, so this week and next week, is a lot more about kind of viewing it as a lecturer, I would say.
Absolutely. And this is, of course, the main aim of the course. RAILect is responsible AI for lecturers. And so digging into this fact, as a lecturer, how should we be perceiving AI? Should we be thinking of it as a friend and taking advantage of this to be able to achieve more in education than was possible before? Or should we be thinking of it as a foe, recognizing that AI submitted assignments can outperform students, as we've been discussing since week 1? This research coming out of Reading has shown that thank you, Lily. This study, which is central to this course, is really important to recognize that AI submitted assignments or can outperform students in first and second year. Or have outperformed students in first and second year courses in this particular study. And so should we be treating it as a foe and trying to avoid it? How can we stop people from using it and make sure that they're actually doing the work themselves rather than just getting AI responses?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, of course, we've started with the case study again, just because it feels like we keep coming back to this one. David didn't know.
It's the heart of the motivation for this course. One of the reasons we feel that it's so important for lecturers at this point in time to be engaging with this subject is across disciplines. This is relevant.
Yeah. And so we're going to go through these kind of 3 different parts today on these different perspectives of AI in education. So we can look at it as a foe, as a friend, and then this third way. And I don't mind, David, if we start off with friend or foe. That one's completely up to you.
I'm happy either way. Dig in where you would like.
We'll start as a foe then.
So rather threatening AI, that.
It's also been generated by AI.
Of course.
So I told them.
That's been one of the points you've been making throughout the course. Almost all the images in this course are generated by AI. Almost all the HTML code to lay them out has been generated by AI. It has been a principle you've used in producing this course, is to use AI to really highlight elements that what it can do.
Yeah. And I mean, I also just want to point out this wasn't the first one that it also generated for me, of course, because in the first one there are a lot of biases in there. The pupils were, I had to ask it to generate pupils of different races in there, which it kind of did, but kind of still didn't. But anyway, that's just generative AI for you.
Absolutely.
In its current state anyway. Maybe it will get better, hopefully. So AI is a foe. So we kind of have lots of different kind of case studies on this, but this is more about, there's been a lot of concerns about AI in education. I mean, from what I'm seeing and what I've kind of, from my experience, but maybe others can correct me on theirs, but it felt like at the start, when ChatGPT first came out, when it really had that boom nearly 2 years ago, there was a lot of panic, and like universities were blocking access to it and whatnot, and were immediately. And then over time, over kind of the next year, they started to think a little bit more deeper about it, of, okay, well, this isn't, okay, what's our long-term solution here?
Absolutely. And I think that's the fact that when it comes out and it is disrupting education, as education has been happening, it is natural for people to be threatened and to feel that it is a threat. And I would argue it is a disruptive technology. And so it is correct in certain cases to consider it as threatening to education standard practice as people have been going through it.
Yeah, perfect. So to kind of illustrate AI AI as a foe, we have these kind of different case studies of how other people have responded. And so this was in Ofqual, which is the kind of board in the UK for exams. This is more at the school level, but for your GCSE and A-level exams, which are kind of between the ages of about 16 and 18, you take these exams in the UK, or generally. But they said that, okay, they want to use exam conditions for coursework because they were worried about people using ChatGPT. And this wasn't just Ofqual was saying this, quite a few people were saying this, that at the time they want, and they still stand by this, a lot of some people that said this anyway, but you know, that we want to use conditions where, okay, students are made to sit down and do their coursework timed, which, I mean, that scared me personally because I'm not someone that ever was particularly good at exams. I know, David, for you, you're kind of, well, we'll get onto it in a bit, but you're excited by the prospect of this maybe opening up avenues for different ways, such as oral examinations, but I'm sure we'll get onto that later.
But I think one of the key things here is this response is in some ways taking huge steps backwards, because for a long time people recognized the value of actually bringing coursework in. You know, originally, of course, everything was exam based, and the push and the effort that was made to integrate coursework and to sort of find diverse ways of engaging with students which aren't just exam focused. And you brought up a really important point, you know, implicitly, because there are gender biases related to assessment techniques. And so if you force everybody back to exams, it's known that this actually, there's elements of bias which then come out in terms of performance. And high stakes exams, there has been evidence that girls or women have underperformed on average in those high stakes exams compared to other forms of assessment where they can excel. And so there are elements there where certain studies have brought in elements of gender differences about different assessment and assignment techniques. And so the fact that this could lead us to a regression of the diversity of assessment is something which I think you're right to be scared of. I'm deeply worried about this, because this is something where the impact of that on education and on us recognizing and valuing the diversity of different ways of, or ways different people interact with education processes, including different forms of assessment. You know, it's a real regression to say, no, we want to reduce the diversity back to standard exams. And my hope is that what we can see is that although there is good reason to be able to sort of do this, that actually the new coursework systems that had been introduced were highly vulnerable to AI in a way which is different for, if you want, exam conditions. That to me is something where the answer is not to revert to exam conditions for everything, but it is a question of sort of recognizing that there are certain assessment types which cannot be given as they used to be given. And that's really the heart of what is being said here. What I would be arguing a better framing of this same statement would be is that, you know, the coursework needs to change as to adapt to ChatGPT and other generative AI tools in what it's in the way that people and students interact with it. And I think that is a really important lesson for lecturers, that coursework elements will need to change. And this is reinforced by the likes of the Reading study that we keep quoting, and others.
No, absolutely. And I guess this kind of leads on to the next bit, which is that, you know, okay, well, so we had people saying about removing the conditions, but then there's also, you know, if you look up online, there's a lot of guidance or a lot of information on, okay, tips to spot if your students are cheating. And I've just highlighted a few here, but it's stuff like comparing it against their previous work. Check for American spellings. I mean, this is particularly relevant for UK based. See if their vocabulary is appropriate. See if are they giving it in typed format. Check, run it through these checks. Such as GPT-0, the ones that can check if they've used ChatGPT. But what scared me is if AI misuse is detected and they've signed something saying that they've not used these tools, the case must be reported to the relevant exam board. And that's something that scares me because well, how do we know that if it's detected? It's not if it's happened, it's if it's detected, which is the key point.
Not even
or suspect.
This is the key thing. And it is this, if misuse is suspected by an exam board marker or has been reported, full details will usually be relayed to the school or college. The board will then consider the case and, if necessary, impose a sanction. The key point here, and this comes back to part of what we were discussing last week, of course, when we were trying to demystify AI, that if you have cases where you are detecting that there is possibility of AI use, you may also be disadvantaging people. So how you respond to that is critical. And so treating it as a foe, and then actually this leading to high stakes punitive sanctions can be very dangerous, because we have wonderful examples where there are people who have written things out and then they've rewritten them under exam conditions, and they still get claimed that this is suspected to have come from AI, even though it is known that it didn't, because it was produced under exam conditions. So we can get that wrong afterwards. So how might we want to address this or deal with this? In my mind, one of the key things is, as a lecturer, if you put yourself in an arms race where you're trying to say, I can be smarter than students and figure it out when they're using AI, you're going to lose. So if you're going to treat AI as a foe, what you should be doing is not putting yourself in a position where the detection is critical, because you're putting yourself at a huge disadvantage. Put yourself in the situation like exam conditions where you know that it's not happening. So even if you suspect it, it can't have happened. Put yourself in the idea of oral exams, where you, again, this is something where this has to be from the person themselves. Diversify. Treat it as a foe by creating spaces where AI is not part of the education. Don't treat it as a foe by assuming you're in an arms race to identify when people are cheating by using it, because that is you're going to lose that. And so that is one of our big advices that we've been consistently trying to reiterate through the course, and I think is so important. We think treating AI as a foe is a useful thing to do, using exam conditions, using oral exams, using other mechanisms which demonstrate that AI is not part of the process, is certainly valuable. And that's a good response for treating it as a foe. Should we dig into another case study?
Yes, yeah, we can. But I just wanted to add to that a conversation that we had at the end of the webinar last week with Meki. He's just left the conversation. He's just left here now, I think, from internet.
Yeah, Getachew, yes.
That's one. And it was, okay, or if you suspect them, okay, I can't orally examine all of my students. Well, okay, how about then ones that you're kind of seeing flagged up, you could then do oral examinations to try and confirm or unconfirm. I can't remember.
Absolutely. It's sort of, you can integrate elements where, at the end of the day, if they have understood what they're doing, that's very different if they haven't. So he was particularly interested in the case of people using AI to write, their thesis and to help them write their thesis. And this is interesting because actually language is a challenge in his context. And so using AI to help improve the language might be a beneficial thing. but it has to be something where that understanding needs to be there. So in the past, in his university, you've only had AI used as sorry, not AI, sorry, you've only had oral exams as part of the final viva. Whereas you could actually bring this forward and you could actually have a defense in the department or just amongst the lecturers, or have multiple stages where the document and the student presenting it are happening to make sure that there are elements where they have understood. And you could have that where that, we're just talking about your use case where you actually have this incident where if you're using oral defenses as a way of sort of reconciling against AI use, you can catch when it's not when people have created a document that they don't understand. And that is absolutely sensible. That relationship being able to sort of, whether it's a good document or a weak document, that element of what's the student's understanding, what can they explain, how does that relate? This all comes back to integrating these multiple assessment types and doing that, whether it's for theses, whether it's for your course work. It really doesn't matter. But being able to think about how we use these multiple assessment types so that we're not treating AI as a foe by trying to sort of catch people out when they cheated. But we're saying, no, we want to have elements in the education system where AI cannot be part of the student assessment and the student interaction. And therefore, you're guaranteed to be getting that that view which represents the student, not and cannot be replaced by them handing in something which is AI generated. Should we go to the next case study?
Yeah, sorry. So well, this is what I like. I like that you can Google about hiding. You can Google about using AI in coursework, and half the hits will be not half. I'm a mathematician, sort of, but a whole chunk of the hits are for lecturers and teachers and educators on how do you spot it, and a whole chunk of them are for the students on how do you prove that you didn't use it, how do you hide it or prove that you didn't use it, depending on the article. And there's all these articles out there which is like, okay, use track changes when you do your work, and all this advice, but yet we still have all of these different case studies. I mean, these are just 5 case studies that came up for me literally Googling, I got falsely accused of using AI. And there's endless accounts of people that are saying, okay, I mean, particularly this one here of the software says my student cheated using AI. They say they're innocent. Who do I believe? Countless stories online.
And this is the point. This is exactly why we don't want lecturers and students to be in an arms race of detecting what the student has done. It is not good for the education. It creates, there are always going to be, your false positives and your false negatives. And so, we're going to miss cases where AI was used and people get an unfairly good grade, which is one of the concerns we remember from the Reading study. 31 out of 33 AI generated scripts got missed. Only 2 were detected. And, here we're seeing all these cases of students being detected as using AI when maybe they didn't. And there will be cases where that is genuinely the case because all of these systems are imperfect. So if you're in an arms race for that, worry about the false positives and the false negatives because they are giving the wrong incentives and it's getting everything wrong. So again, I come back to the key point of this. If you're going to treat AI as a foe, create spaces which are AI free rather than spaces and assessments which are AI free, rather than trying to make sure you can catch or detect when AI has been used on assignments or in cases where you don't know whether it was used or not. That's our big advice with treating AI as a foe. And of course, it's ironic that we were critical at the start of, Ofqual sort of saying, well, you should go back to exam conditions. But that is exactly part of the advice. That is part of a solution. It is not the solution. So there are elements of one and there's elements of others which should be included. AI is a friend. It's a much nicer looking classroom.
Yeah, I mean, it's still, you can still tell it's AI generated because university is written funny. I love just being able to spot AI generated images because they've just,
Then got 4 fingers as well.
yeah, who does? One of them probably does. Yeah.
Um,
Again, I again tried to give a more representative view, a representative what word do I want? Just more
more
diverse
diversity. Yes.
AI actually blur people, I think, because I was like, no, make it more diverse, and it was like, yeah, so you go, I've made it more diverse, and it blurred. Anyway, that's a whole other. I just find it quite fun to use and to have these arguments with AI, of it telling me I've done that, and I'm like, no, you haven't. But that's aside from the point. Just what's this on the floor? I have no idea. Just a balloon or something. Anyway.
Exactly what you have in any classroom, isn't it? Anyway.
Yes. So AI as a friend, I mean, there's again a lot of case studies on where people have tried to use it as a friend in their education, or in as education. So this is from the University of Nottingham, and it's a lecturer there who is, I've actually not put up quotes on here of what the lecturer said. Unfortunately, I probably should have done, but they used it for stuff like to help their students with spell checking, to help their students with their writing, to help them prepare for interviews and things, treating AI as a friend and really encouraging their students to use AI.
Absolutely. And there's so many cases coming up now, more where people are having imaginative ways to use generative AI in education, where the expectation is that the outcomes of the education will be better. And that's the key point, that actually that mindset of saying, well, okay, how can we use AI to achieve deeper learning, to increase the complexity, to increase the ability of students in whichever way we're looking for, to be able to expose them to things they might not have been exposed to before. And the example you've given of the interview is one I've heard a few times now.
Yeah, and it's one as well on our podcast, which I think is released on Friday.
Yes.
We have a conversation with a lecturer and how they've kind of integrated these AI tools in with their education.
Absolutely. Yes, and that's really critical, this idea of actually being able to use AI in ways which can enhance our lectures, can enhance the students' experience. And this is critical. What I'm really interested in is, as we've got this question about who should be doing that and how, is a really interesting question. And I like the fact you've drawn out this example of the fact that, well, should we be working with, if we're building AI things, it's big tech which is building them. There's lots of money going into this. Or what can you do as an individual lecturer? That's really part of the question. And I think there's these 2 examples which you've overlaid on one another. One where an individual lecturer took the initiative, and another where a whole school district started working with AI on an AI teaching assistant. And what I think is really important is, it is not that one of these approaches is better than the other. We need bits of both. The tools that already exist, we need people to be thinking through how they can be used in imaginative and different ways. And we do need new tools to be built, which actually are making it or enabling different things to happen that couldn't happen with the existing AI tools. And so both of those are really, really important. And I'm not wanting to sort of push people towards one or the other, but I do want to reinforce that one of those is in the power of every single lecturer who listens to this, who takes part in this course, being able to recognize and recognize that you have the power to change your own classroom, your own lecture halls. That is something which we can all do. Others can collaborate and build something which is new and exciting, but that's not for everyone. There are going to be some people who will engage in that, and how many individual lecturers will get that opportunity, I don't know. But I do know that every single lecturer can use tools that exist in different and imaginative ways, and that is at least as important.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that out on this one. It was more like just these two different ways that we can use AI.
Absolutely.
And then, okay, this third one is from the University of Cambridge, an interview with Steve Watson and I think it was Vince Connolly. It's Dr. something Connolly, but both of them are educators at the University of Cambridge. And this is a link to their whole conversation and is given on the Moodle page. And I think it's a really fascinating read, but they're talking about their views on AI and how they're using it. And so Dr. Steve Watson is saying that he's finding that the technology is helping students to present their ideas in a clear and organized manner and in the right form, allowing teachers to focus on the ideas themselves. So kind of not focusing as much on, and some other people have said this as well, but not focusing as much on kind of the grammar aspects, but instead getting to focus more on the interesting, fun bits. So saying,
I would put this as the really nice thing of actually being able to focus on substance over style. You know, this is you know, we believe in this rather deeply. You know, there's been a lot of elements where things have been style over substance, but generative AI does style so well that you can actually get down to now focusing on the substance. And of course, the generative AI can't do the substance as well in most topics, in most areas. And so that's where the student differentiation can come through. That the AI can be used to make sure that all the students can present their ideas clearly in a really well structured way with good style. And if the AI is helping them to really do that, then as you say, we hope the differentiating factor is going to become the substance. That sounds like such a good thing for education, to be able to focus more on substance. Well, how is that bad? And that's again this point, shifting the focus of education towards critical thinking and big questions. And this is the dream for education. Making it deeper.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I was just really glad to find this. It was not difficult as well to find quotes and to find people that are talking about these ideas. It was actually surprising how many different lecturers are really trying to push this forward and talking about these different ways that they're using it. And so then Dr. Connolly on the right, he's saying different ways that he's used it in different classroom settings, in GCSE computer science. But my favorite point is in that like kind of last paragraph or so, it's also helped postgraduates for whom English is a second language clarify what they mean in their writing. And I guess this is really relevant to what we were saying about what Getch was saying, but they can give it a paragraph and ask it to rewrite it in an academic style. The results have been impressive, and it reduces the cognitive burning of translating for these students by allowing them to focus on the content rather than the technical aspects of their writing. And again, it's just exactly what you said, but it's just more people agreeing, which I think is fantastic.
And I think what I want to be really clear on here is that we have this opportunity to take AI and to consider it as the tool which is going to be commonplace in the future. This is the tool which is going to enable people to be more productive. It's already increasing productivity. I mean, we've discussed in previous lectures about how you use AI, how you've used it to develop these courses, how a lot of the components within this, there's elements where you've deliberately focused on images, and even styles generated by AI to show what's possible and what's easy. And if you were doing it before, we'd have probably had to get a designer in to do this. And it's just empowered you as someone who's created the content and the content repos in different ways to achieve more. And that's the power of it. If we can encourage students to use that power so that they are focusing on what they're learning and how their reasoning is improving, it's going to hopefully enhance the education we give. That's what could be possible treating it as a friend.
Fantastic.
Maybe, go ahead. Should we?
No, I was going to say we next go into a third way. So if you still got more to say on as a friend,
I think the way I'd like to finish this is there was very brief mention of the idea of this as for personal tutors, and I think this is something which is really important. It's a dream in many ways in terms of making education more equitable. It is recognized that most technological innovations have increased the inequalities in educations rather than reducing them. The idea that AI could enable people all over the world to get the equivalent of personal tuition through an AI tutor, which could be made very cost effective so that in theory, this could be accessible all over the world. And that could reduce the inequalities in education. Now, we're not there yet. The technology is not there yet, but that is part of the aspiration of what people are investigating now. And there is a belief that we can get towards that. And not everybody is looking at it from the way of reducing inequalities in education. Many of them are looking at it from commercial business models, which would, of course, just increase the inequalities in education. But that's exactly one of the topics which I think, as we think of AI as a friend, we need to keep it at the back of our mind where it could be going, just how far we could take this. The idea that there's elements of private tuition which could be made available at scale is really exciting, because that could lead to really increased educational outcomes. Okay, let's move on to our third way.
a third way. I guess what we're trying to, so in this point here, like whether it's a friend or foe isn't actually such the relevant question anymore, or the relevant concern, because it now exists. We live with generative AI. It's here. Well, we live with AI, but now we all have access to kind of generative AI. It's here now. And the question is no longer, okay, how do I use it? But, well, the question, is now how we should use it, not should I treat it as a friend or a foe?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things we've been quite careful, I think, with our presentation of AI as a friend or foe is how to respond to treating it as a friend or a foe. This third way, the recognition, is the fact that it is neither. It is just part of our world. The example that I like to give on this is if you have a housemate, if you're in a shared house, it doesn't matter whether you like your housemate or you dislike them. You need to live with them. That's exactly by definition, that's the nature of being, that relationship. It doesn't matter whether they're a friend or a foe. That's not the point. Because they're a housemate, you need to learn to live with them. And we need to think of AI and generative AI now as a housemate. It is something we need to learn to live with. Sometimes we might treat them as a friend. Sometimes we might treat them as a foe. I remember housemates who I didn't get on with, where actually that was great because I didn't feel I needed to be home. I could go out and do things all the time. And when I had housemates that I really liked, well, actually it was a bit of constraint because I wanted to spend time at home, but I was busy doing other things. And so, it doesn't matter. If you've got a housemate, it doesn't matter if they're a friend or a foe. That just affects how you interact with them. You can sometimes be benefiting from treating them as a friend or a foe, irrespective of whether they are or not. You know, when you're a friend, you run to them. When they're a foe, you try to avoid them. You might run away. You know, it doesn't matter. You have to deal with them, and you have to think about them in terms of how you plan your life and how you make your decisions. And that's what's really important. So I think we've articulated the fact that actually, when you're thinking of them as a foe, don't think about sort of, you know, it really isn't constructive to get into an arms race of detecting when people have used it, might or might not have used it. There's both false positives and false negatives are dangerous, and you know, there's no tools out there which will ever be 100%, and so you will always have issues with that. So instead, if you're going to treat it as a foe, create AI-free spaces or opportunities, be that in an assessment, an exam-style assessment, an oral assessment. You know, there's lots of different ways to create AI-free learning environments, and that is useful and constructive. And embrace them at times as a friend. You know, this is the thing. It's so important. We've seen that there is potential there. You can potentially get higher order learning in however you think of that. And so by embracing that, the expectation is there will be elements of education which you can improve, where you can hope that the education you can give now is better than the education you could give before you had access to generative AI.
Perfect. Absolutely. I mean, this is a quote from Kevin Roos on a New York Times article, and it's mainly that last paragraph of today's students will graduate into a world full of generative AI programs. They need to know their way around their tools, their strengths and weaknesses, their hallmarks and blind spots in order to work alongside them. To be good citizens, they'll need hands-on experience to understand how this type of AI works, what biases it contains, and how it can be misused and weaponized. And to me, this is a really, I mean, we've looked at these case studies and how it's gone wrong by people using it, misusing it, misunderstanding the output by people so we saw the Dutch example last week of this big scandal of using, people coming out. It was saying that they were at risk of fraud, but it was interpreted that they are actually being fraudulent, which was not true. And I think that these are really important lessons that we need to know now and learn now before even I can't even imagine how a more tragic story can come out beyond the Dutch example. But I am fearful of that we haven't learned it, because I didn't know about that until we started working on these courses.
Absolutely, and they will. I mean, these tragedies are actually happening, and they will continue to happen for years to come. Understanding how to, as a society, we can responsibly use AI is going to be a generational challenge. And I think, again, as educators, preparing the next generation to be up to that challenge, to actually be using tools responsibly from as early as possible, and certainly once they get into higher education, is critical. And that does mean that as educators, we need to do something which is unusual. We need to teach in ways which are different to how we were taught. It's very interesting how in education, there is a tendency to want to recognize that you are who you are because of how you were taught, and therefore trying to reproduce the successes of your own education for the next generation. It's a very natural human instinct. But we are asking lecturers, and we are expecting now lecturers to take on and to recognize that they need to teach in ways which are different to how they were taught. And that is a really fantastic challenge for those who choose to accept it.
Which leads great on to the next one, which is that ChatGPT is going to change education, not destroy it. That actually with things like ChatGPT, there's now the opportunity for this kind of transformation in education.
Absolutely.
A lot of, again, this article here, it's also linked on the Moodle page, but a lot of interesting stories in this article of different ways that people are using ChatGPT to change the question, which comes into next week a lot. Comes into next week's module on changing.
Changing the
a
question.
lot more.
Absolutely. And maybe let me just come in on this very quickly, because it is worth just introducing our aim next week on the changing the question topic is to dig into and to really say, okay, how can we achieve more in education through the uses of these generative AI tools and AI in general? And that's something which I think is a lot of this comes down to assessment and how we need to rethink what we ask students to do, what we ask students to know. This is going to change, and changing the question is really investigating that. It's looking into that in much more detail.
Thank you. And then another one who says, so Ethan Mollick, or Professor Ethan Mollick, from the University of Pennsylvania, who said that large language models aren't going to get less capable in the next few years. We need to figure out a way to adjust to these tools and not just ban them. Linking to our point before of AI as a foe, of, okay, well, we have at the moment these different tools where we can detect it. And we've already established that these tools can have false positives and false negatives. But on top of that, they're not going to get worse. They're not going to, generative AI is just going to improve from here. And there's already ways that you can bypass these kind of detections. You can even say to it, write this and make it sound less robotic, which I've tried that before and it does work. Or feed it in other bits of your work that you've written and say to it, okay, make this fit the style. Here's my paragraph, fit this in the style of these other paragraphs, which again, I've done that before as well. It potentially even in this course, in wanting, obviously, I can't remember if I have done it in this course or not, but obviously wanting everything. I don't want suddenly one section to sound completely different to another section. So wanting to have that consistency, and it's good at that.
Yeah. And this is the thing, this is not cheating, this is using it well for things it's good at. Where it becomes bad is when you use it to be able to come up. And we discussed this in actually in the very first section, where we encourage people to use it, of these different ways you can use it responsibly. And, this classification that we had of using it to generate ideas, using it to iterate ideas, and using it to polish. And the key point being, to me, is that in the generate stage, you are using it to stimulate your creativity of coming up with new things. In your iteration, you are looking at how the substance can change, and you should be thinking very carefully about different formulations of the substance that you're trying to communicate, because that's what you're using it for. And in that polishing, you should be making sure that the substance doesn't change, that it's only the style of how that substance is presented which changes. And so that element of that relationship between the substance you're trying to communicate and the style in which it's communicated is a really important distinction, and which came out in how we encourage people to investigate different ways to use generative AI. And the key point being, to finish on this key point here, that they are not going to get less capable. There is nothing but progress over the next few years, which is anticipated. And there are many, many points at which they will and can improve from where they are now. And that's really exciting, but it's also a little bit worrying, because we don't know what the systems of the future will be able to do. So anything we build now, anything we think of, anything we try now, we might need to readjust it as new capabilities come out, which push the boundaries of what the systems can do. So we're not just in a point of change now, we're in a point of change going forward. Yes, carry on.
No, thank you. Yeah, I guess also just to highlight this point that we've had before of, using AI in education doesn't mean only using AI in education. Like it's still really useful and important to have in it aspects where, as you've said before, David, maybe this means more oral examinations, or having it in it aspects of, I know in the podcast that's come with this lecturer that's been using it, they said that one thing that they do to step away from using AI in every single part of it is actually having kind of oral debates between students so that they can um, so that they can still be interactive, but they're not relying on the robots and kind of getting that education in there. And there's these two, is it? Yeah, these two here. This is a great article, the second one that came out a couple of weeks ago that David and I we're yet to have a good discussion on this, but I know that we will when we get around to it. But it's about that they gave different people different stories to read, and some of them were generated, they were all written by humans, but in some of them the ideas for the story was generated by AI. And in the ones where the ideas were generated by AI, they were generally more well received. They were more enjoyed because of kind of plot twists and stuff in them. However, they were a lot less diverse within each other. These kind of the ones that came from AI generated ideas were very similar to one another. I know David we can talk about this at length, and I'm sure we will in a podcast at some point. But
and there's this key tension here that we want education to be better for everyone. And so if we can get it so that it is reducing inequalities in education and it is good for everybody, then that is a really fantastic thing. And we hope that AI may be able to help with that. But we also don't want to reduce diversity in education, because diversity, once you're at a certain level, diversity is nothing but good. That it means you have different ways of learning, different ways of thinking. It suits different people in different ways. And so, that element of trying to not have people who are getting a really bad education, so raising the base level, and also not trying to lose the richness that comes with an individual teacher being able to inspire because they have that inspiration that they give. We want that. So this element of diversity is so important. And I think that's a really important component of the whole process of education. AI is potentially shaking it at its roots if we can get really powerful tools that are able to offer education more broadly for everybody at a higher level. And that is fantastic and dangerous at the same time, because we don't want everybody to be getting the same thing. Diversity is so important. Localization of concepts and context. It's the richness of our world. So it's a wonderful challenge for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, perfect. And so then that, I guess, leads us to our final thoughts, which, I mean, you've pretty much summarized anyway there, but on the diversity front, but also kind of summarized throughout of the, we want to embrace AI, but also that doesn't mean that we want to have just AI content, therefore. We can also have spaces free of AI as well as having it embraced, having that diversity.
Exactly. And therefore, what I hope is that it's giving an opportunity to increase diversity of experience in education. That's part of what I think will lead to a better education.
Which can then create more skills. I mean, I know, David, that you did do quite a few oral examinations in your education, but
because I went to a German system, and at the time they had oral examinations as part of that, and that was this was as part of the diploma they had, which was a master's style degree. And I was lucky that I went there on an Erasmus scholarship for a year, and I got that experience. I saw a total different way of giving education, of interacting, and oral examinations were a great privilege. I really gained a lot from that experience. And I think your second point here is this is critical, and it is this fact that as educators, we have to recognize, even if AI is threatening what has happened before, we have to recognize it as an opportunity to do more, to be better, rather than worrying about it as because of what it's taken away. We have to consider it as an optimistic, so being optimistic about the way it can enhance education, rather than just being worried about what we lose.
Perfect. Yeah, no, thank you. And then just this awareness that, okay, this is new. AI in education is new, and we don't actually know the kind of long-term impact, but we can try things out, discuss it, see how it goes, see what works, see what doesn't work, and actually create these different discussions on it,
Absolutely.
to kind of see. And I put in here, will it lead to an absence of fundamental skills? That was kind of linked, David, to a story that you told me before of in, I think it was in primary schools, them removing times tables at one point to see if that
Yeah.
would help.
And I actually have, it's a generation before mine, but that basically you could tell the year whether people went to school before or after this intervention happened, because those who went before were able to do all sorts of mental arithmetic, and those who came after couldn't. And it had long-term impacts in terms of the British economy in all sorts of different ways. But it was a very clear element, and we can't know the long-term impacts of the things we're suggesting. I believe because what we're talking about now in this context is looking at the higher education level. I think that impact is sort of, it is important, but it's going to be less drastic at society. But these same questions are happening all the way down through schooling into early childhood education. And it is fundamental in terms of the way these tools are changing learning. And we still don't, there's not enough knowledge out there to be able to guide it always in the right way. There will be missteps, and we need to be aware of that and conscious and observant.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, thank you very much, David. Then just the final point, which is linked to that, embracing and educate AI in education requires a commitment to continuously adapt and innovate. This is an
This
opportunity.
exactly on this point that because we don't know what the implications are going to be, we're going to have to go through these iteration cycles, and we have to buy into that from now, that if you're going to sort of do this, you try things, you iterate, you learn, and ideally you share those learnings for others to learn about as well and to be inspired by. And you then read and you look at what others have done and you get inspired by them as well. And this is where we hope part of this course will create this learning community around these ideas. And that's a big part of why we're creating this course, why we want lecturers to engage. And it's an opportunity. It really is for a lecturer. Right now, if you embrace this, it's an exciting time to think about how we can give education, how we can change education and give an education which would not have been possible before.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you. Thank you for setting this up. And despite the internet challenges, it seems that this has been okay.
Oh, I think it's held out.
Thank you.